When you're new to working in an emergency room, it's hard to avoid getting overwhelmed by the cognitive overload of a continual stream of patient after patient, device after device, and beep after beep. This episode follows Dr. Caroline Morton's career from medical doctor to software engineer. It's a fascinating story that involves learning to code, learning Rust, starting a company, starting a new career, and having the ambition and determination to know that it's the right thing to do.
Yeah, brilliant. So I am running a company. It's called Yellowbird Consulting, but it's soon to be Clinical Metrics. It's a medical simulation platform, and the back end is built in Rust. What it essentially is a virtual emergency room. So we've created a way to make an unlimited amount of virtual patients that are based on the underlying epidemiology features of. We've got currently 52 diseases in it, and patients arrive. You start with 3, and then they just keep on arriving, much like real life, except you'd never start with just 3. And you have to take a history from a chatbot. You can order any investigation that you might want to in a real emergency room. You can order blood tests. You have to wait for them to come back, writing notes. The aim of the product is to improve clinical reasoning, but it's also to test the cognitive load and to really train people about that cognitive load, which I found in my experience is just not well taught, or it's not even taught, it's like experienced as a junior doctor or as a medical student in particular, where it's not just one patient at a time. You have to think, oh, I've got this patient, they're here, I've got to remember to chase the bloods for this other person. Oh, this person I've sent for an X-ray, and you've got to be able to keep it all in your mind and develop systems that you can keep track of everything. And to be honest, that's what's really challenging when you're a junior doctor, is
Mm.
not necessarily that the content is so crazy difficult, it's the cognitive load of trying to remember all of the things you must do.
Do you also integrate aspects like, oh, the charge nurse is like demanding something, or the human dynamics of essentially being in ED and being distracted, or like someone, yeah, like my experience as a patient. So, happened to spend several hours at our ED with my girls. My 6-year-old is asthmatic, and I've also come off a mountain bike a few times, and so I am aware of the kind of when you're stuck in the waiting room, you spend a lot of time observing the
Yeah.
practice, or at least I do. And yeah, and I have both sympathy and like extremely high regard for doctors in an emergency room, because um, it essentially is just a large series of difficult choices. At least that's what it seems to me. Is that accurate?
I wouldn't say necessarily that they're difficult choices, because a lot of it is protocolized. So, there
Sure.
is
No,
a
right, right,
particular
right,
thing
right.
thing that you do, but I think it's the volume. There's definitely a volume problem. And you're also managing not only people's like physical health complaints, you're also trying to like manage their emotions of they're frustrated or they're drunk, or, there's all sorts of problems. And also
Or
the
they're
space.
sore
The space
and
is
tired,
limited.
and yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
totally. It's and would you imagine a junior doctor essentially playing in their free time? Is that the
Yeah.
is this essentially a game? Like
Yeah, it's
Sim
a
Hospital, for
gamification.
example? Okay.
Yeah. It's a gamification. So we're in 2 medical schools in Germany at the moment, hoping to expand to UK, maybe the US market. I've just taken the leap to go full-time on the company,
Yeah.
having run it part-time for 4 years, with, 2 other co-founders, including Maxwell Flitton, who who's quite big in the Rust community. And we've taken the leap, gonna try and move it into the UK market. But in Germany, the way that it's used is it's embedded within the curriculum. So, they
Mhm.
have a slightly different system to. I know the New Zealand system is quite similar to UK, but in Germany, they seem to have these quite long terms where you might do cardiology and you have teaching at the same time. You might have cardiology lectures at the same time that you're also going to the cardiology ward. So it's
Right,
in a way
okay,
more
sure. So that
integrated.
is if you're going through and becoming an emergency specialist, that pathway is quite different. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, it's really different in Germany. At least this is my understanding. So just with the medical schools, they might have the way that it's used right now is, or our tool clinical metrics is that they do it every week and over like say 6 weeks or 8 weeks, and at the same time they're receiving lectures on various heart conditions. Say if they're doing cardiology, so they might see lots of cardiology patients within our simulation.
Mm,
But they don't, at least this is my understanding, they don't really have emergency medicine as its own specialty in the same way that
sure.
we have it in the UK. It's like you're a I know, respiratory doctor, but you work in the emergency room. So there's slight
Right.
variations.
Yeah, and I assume, there are both cultural and, sorry, like, the pathways must be quite different for how we train doctors, the must be quite different all across the world, or I guess there are probably similarities, but yeah, there's also I happen to know this because I did pre-hospital emergency care, essentially the start of ambulance training
Great.
a while ago, and, the thing that was really interested me was that on the continent, there is much more on-site care, if
Mm.
you're very, very serious, if you're very hurt. Whereas the other philosophy is that you basically scoop and run, and you try
Oh,
to get to
yeah.
the hospital as quickly as possible. Like, especially for, let's say, trauma patients. There's kind of the big debate whether or not you kind of patch on site or you kind of pick them up and get them to the hospital, get them to ED.
It's like
Anyway, it's probably
stay and play, isn't it? Stay and play or run, like scoop and run. Or,
yeah, yeah. I
um,
don't actually remember any of the terms anymore. I should, um, but at one point, yeah, I was an aspirational ambulance volunteer. But
Amazing.
the uh, however, so I'm kind of inherently kind of interested in this, but the thing that I'm curious about, like more from I guess the Rust perspective, is why would you pick kind of a crazy difficult programming language to implement something which could be probably implemented in something that is much more conventional?
Oh, well, it's gone through various iterations. So it actually started initially with a Python backend.
Hmm.
And what did we, I think we had a React app to start with. So Python microservices backend and a React app, which, that was like the first year. I wouldn't say we didn't know what we were doing, but we were, kind of, we didn't really realize it was going to become the business that it has become, if that makes sense. I always say
Mm,
that we sort of accidentally set up a company. It was very much a side project. Me and Max were really into Python at the time. And yeah, then, two things happened at the same time. One, Max, who's the other business partner, he was getting really into Rust. He was writing this Rust and web programming. I was quite reluctant initially to learn Rust because I just didn't feel that I had a hugely solid grasp on Python. And I was also like a junior doctor. And so I was like trying to manage various different, I was trying to finish my postgraduate exams, and COVID was also happening. So it was kind of a busy time, but essentially, the sort of final thing which happened was we went into production. We have this chatbot where you have, up to 3 patients per student, and you might have, say, 120 students in a class. What happens at the start of the class is they all log in at the same time. So you've got this 5-minute window where the server's getting absolutely smashed. And
mm.
basically, it fell over in a pretty major way the first time we used it.
And
And
sort of quote in anger or what have you.
well, it just well, we sort of initially didn't know what was going. It just like the sort of user experience was it got really slow. But luckily we had lots of
Okay.
metrics on the back end. We've got this amazing DevOps engineer who helps us, Harry. And so we were able to pinpoint it was coming from the chatbot. And essentially, we just started ripping stuff out of the Python backend and turning them into Rust until we just had the skeleton of the sort of Python. It was more like an orchestration server in the end. It just like sent stuff out to various Rust microservices. And then we've just switched over to Rust completely. I'm not sure I'll ever write a sort of big project in Python again. I still
Hmm.
love it for various things, like more fancy scripting. But yeah, Rust is it's amazing. So that's really our origin story. It wasn't the sexiest of
No, no, no.
stories. It
I
was just
assumed,
like
like,
we sort of
I
just need
had
to
some. It is interesting to hear that essentially you kind of were forced to choose something. Like essentially the application had reached its limits, and whether or not it was the there'd be people screaming at us through their headphones saying, "Oh, it was the suit, it was the architecture, da 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 da. Maybe it was this, it was that. Nothing should fall over with 120 people, da 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 da. Whatever.
yeah.
Ignore them because in practice, what you decided to do is say, look, we've hit the limits. Now we're essentially forced to try something else." And I think it's really nice to hear that Rust and its community hopefully was accessible enough to enable you to kind of get going, even as, quote, not a, let's say, expert Python developer or what have you. Because, by the way, you've got this entire other career that very soon, within 24 months, you're kind of waving goodbye to. At least that's my perception of what happens next. Is that correct?
So just with the
Oh,
120 users, I just to go back to that. We did have it was all running on a Kubernetes cluster. So our initial sort of patching problem or patch was that we massively scaled the servers. So when we knew we were going to have a class, we just, went up from say like 3 nodes to like 8 nodes, spun up loads of pods, and I had to learn how to do that, which was really interesting. So like essentially like really scaling it, which did alleviate a lot of the pain. The problem is if you're a tiny like startup, is paying for it. And
yeah, it's
so
awful.
yeah,
Horrific.
so it was like, yeah, this might solve our problem. And we did some stuff where we made the chatbots overnight. We like cached them in what did we? I think Redis. Can't remember, but we cached them, and then we had sort of various different solutions. But ultimately, it becomes a financial choice because
Mm.
you're like, yeah, this would work, but equally we're like, we don't want to run out of money.
And so just these chatbots, they're presumably so they are doing a lot of work. Are they so is this sort of large language models? Do they have personalities? Are they sort of trying to mimic being an individual with a condition who
Yeah.
can't really describe exactly what's going on? They just know that they're having difficulty breathing or what have you.
Yeah, so that's so what's been really interesting for us is like how ChatGPT has sort of forced us to innovate in many ways. I had a prototype of the chatbot probably back in 2018, which was very much a command line tool in Python. You could ask a question and it would give you some response, which wasn't very good. And that was just using a Python library, open source library. We initially were using that, and um, it wasn't like brilliant, I would say. We tried sorts of different ways of making it better, but the main thing, people loved the chatbot.
Yeah.
And this is obviously before ChatGPT. We had no idea that was gonna like come along. But people were like, "Oh, this is amazing," even if it wasn't very good, and they're very tolerant of the fact it wasn't very good because they got to speak
Yeah.
to this patient. Um, then we moved to sentence embedding. So basically, I was a bit unhappy with
Yeah.
the Python chatbot. I took apart the open source library to find out how it worked. Um, and what was amazing to me was that it had ever worked at all. Once I actually got into like the nitty gritty of how it actually did responded. So I rewrote it in Rust, actually. That was one of the early things we did. I know it sounds a bit insane, but that was like one of my early Rust projects, was rewriting it. And then we eventually went to sentence embeddings. So
I have a very small point to make about, or at least kind of, people often ask the best way to learn Rust. And I usually say the best thing to do is to write something that you have a good understanding of the domain. Like, essentially rewrite something smallish, not trivial, but I think it's a really good approach, because I think it's very healthy, because you don't want to be learning a new thing. Like, I need to write a chatbot. Like, how do
yeah.
I do that? And learn Rust at the same time. Like, we really, like you were talking about cognitive overload, we kind of need to retain a little bit of working memory in order to continue to move forward.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. I think it's so important to not. You want to get that sweet spot where it's difficult enough that it challenges you and is interesting, but it's not
Mhm.
so overwhelming that you just want to give up. I think, you know, the major advantage that I had, well, I had two huge advantages. One, I had Max. And so, you know, if you've got a buddy, I'd highly recommend you always have a buddy who is better than you at whatever you're trying to
Mhm.
learn, because you can just ask them, how would I do this? Or just watch them code something up, and you just get a lot of understanding about different design patterns and different approaches to how they break down a problem. That was the sort of huge advantage I had. The second advantage, though, was, which I do not recommend to other people, is we had customers. So it wasn't, you know, it wasn't like, "Oh, this is a toy project. Oh, it's got a bit hard. I'll just give up and maybe start again with a new repo." It was like, "Well, we've got customers." So,
Yeah, and actually, they've got needs. So
yeah, they've got
that
needs, and it's 2 a.m. and this has got to be written. So, that's just how it is, and that really accelerated my learning curve, but it was, I would say, a slightly painful experience at the time.
as a doctor, do you have any tips for essentially long extended periods of work? Like, this seems to be something that's drilled into everyone, that junior doctors have to work lots of hours and do lots and lots, essentially many rounds. I don't know what the metric is, like what the unit of time, I suppose it's shifts. But
Yeah.
it does seem to me that, I don't know if there is anywhere that there's this kind of problem of like grinding people, like grinding the soul out of them. You kind of,
Yeah,
although that's
I do agree. I can see it from both sides, and I think, you know, when I was like in F1, which is like the first year you're a doctor, foundation year one, it was just a miserable experience, to be totally honest with you.
yeah,
All you
sure.
do is sleep and work pretty much. But then, you know, you also need a system which can output, you know, it's a production line. Like, people forget this. Like, you
Sure.
want to output thousands of doctors who are qualified in being GPs or being cardiologists or surgeons, and that production time needs to be as short as possible for it to be effective. And essentially, you can't, you know, if it takes 7 years, or say it would take 5 years to be a GP, um, you know, unless you want that to be 10 years, you have to really,
Do the
yeah,
hours, right?
like, you have
Yep.
to do the hours. There is a volume thing, again, where you just need to see, like, I've seen thousands of patients, and
Mm.
that's just, you know.
Yeah, so there's a couple of things I should pause there, just because there'll be some people that don't understand the terminology. So in the British system, which I guess I've inherited, the GP stands for general practitioner. So this is essentially a family doctor,
That's what
would
I
be a
trained
term.
as.
Um, that's quite a difficult specialty, as I understand it. Is that correct? That,
Yeah,
I don't know if there's
I
any
think
such as a,
so. Yeah.
yeah,
I
because
I think so, yeah. It's one
I
of
mean,
those. Sorry.
I was going to say, I guess it's all hard, but I think if you're dealing with people, and we call the primary health organization, so if like, uh, if you're in a practice talking to patients who, everything is different. There's no continuity. Some of them you have just met for the first time, others you have dealt with for the last several years, and they trust you, and you've got to do all of that within a 15-minute consultation. Strikes me as particularly challenging.
It's one of those things where it's really, if you ask lots of doctors who are not GPs, this is kind of, I mean, hopefully it's got a bit better now, but it used to be like, oh, they're
So,
just a GP. It's like you're not
yeah,
smart enough to do, one of the proper professions like
yeah.
anesthetic
You're not in a
or
hospital, right? You're a
surgery or yeah.
community practice, right? It's like a serious medicine. Um,
But it is
it could even be
difficult.
worse. It could be dentistry.
Yeah, although you'd be rolling in the cash, so
That's right.
praise
I don't
funds.
know, but the distinction between medicine and dentistry is the weirdest thing. By the way, I just find that the most bizarre historical quirk.
We
But
shared a medical school or we shared a physical building with the dental school, and I was there 6 years. I met one dentist. Like they sort of you just never saw them, and they presumably never saw us. It was just a very strange sort of like I know they're here somewhere, but
yeah,
who knows where. So yeah,
yeah. Well,
I,
so, the other term that I wanted to just to clarify was junior doctor, because this
oh,
sounds like something. It's like, oh, you must be 19. But no, 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 no. The term junior doctor is reserved for someone who's gone all the way through medical school, gone then through specialist training, and is then going through the process of essentially becoming the next step after that, I think, is consultant, correct? Or like senior doctor,
yeah.
then consultant, or
No, so
so, but
you're a junior doctor from the day you graduate medical school until you become either a fully qualified GP or a fully qualified consultant, which
right,
is a bit of
right.
an
And that would be
insane
the difference in the
situation.
hospital.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
So,
Um,
yeah.
yeah.
So,
Okay. So we've gone through many arcane details of like so this is actually one of the things I I think that I was mostly curious about um when I was thinking about this interview, which is that you've devoted a huge amount of your life to the profession, and if this thing that you're building works, then it could maybe change outcomes for patients worldwide. Like, let's say just steer the needle ever so slightly towards like whereas as an individual you're sort of limited to those, just this quote small number of thousands of patients.
yeah.
um I don't know if that was that the kind of calculus that you were going through.
Yeah, so I would say so. It's definitely played into it. The simulation program came from something that's just used to basically just used to annoy me so much whenever I did simulation training, because you would typically go into a room and there would be a simulator, and you would say, the simulator would say, or simulated patient would say, I've got chest pain, and then you would say, oh, I'd order this an ECG and a troponin, which is a blood test, and then you would be handed those results immediately. And it's like, this is not realistic. In real life, my bleep would be going off, which is like the little pager which we still use.
Hmm.
And but you'd also have like 30 patients, and you'd have, ward rounds to compare, like, and handover. And so really it very much started as a pet project of mine, because I was like, this is so annoying. I've got to solve this problem. And then, it's slightly gotten a bit out of hand, and now it's my full-time job. But yeah, the idea is to try and get people to take this training, and then they can also have some way of standardizing the sort of, like, it's not trying to replace like going into hospitals, talking to patients. That's obviously a key part of training, like still training. It should still be an apprenticeship model in that way,
Hmm.
but you know, you can't guarantee when you're doing your I don't know, neurology block that you're definitely, like, in that 2-week period, you're definitely going to see somebody who's got status, or which is an epileptic, unresponsive basically to typical things. Anyway, the point is, you can't guarantee that you're going to see a patient with that condition in your 2 weeks that you'll happen to be there, especially the serious ones, because they should be stopped. Or, like stroke
Right.
patients gets taken straight into the cath lab now, or they get straight into, like, and have the clot removed. That might completely remove the medical student from even seeing that. And so
Oh,
the
right. So what you're
it's like trying to
describing now
standardize it. Yeah.
is through some sort of the apprenticeship model. Ideally, we would like to expose students to as many patients as possible. However, there are some who are so severe, so are very, very sick, that they really need help right now, which actually means that they bypass these these critical cases essentially can't be trained on, which is a
Yeah, they
kind of a
bypass, and also they just random chance, they just might
right.
not, have turned up. I did a week of ENT in my whole medical school training. I obviously didn't see the vast majority of ENT conditions during that
Mhm.
time. And you could say that about lots of specialties. So I think,
Sure.
you want to be able to standardize the sort of, you know, learning opportunities that people have had, and this is part of what we're trying to do, if that makes sense.
I think so. I think that there is a difficulty with kind of edutech in the sense of it can, because it's so good at being instrumented, it can kind of be weaponized against you in a little bit, at least. There's two sides of, if I wanted to learn if I wanted to do extra work, I'd go onto Khan Academy, for example, and I would like learn mathematics and I would kind of push myself ahead. Or I could go via classroom. All of these edutech platforms essentially provide very specific metrics about individual performance to educators. And I sort of have this personal wince about the idea that you're actually exposing people to I don't know, humiliation. Although I guess in the space of like medicine, you learn very quickly, presumably, that everything is observable. Essentially, like all of your decisions are. That's why you're copiously writing notes, because there are reviews, and essentially everything that you decide to do, uh, every diagnostic tool that you asked for, or did you ask for too many? Were you all of your clinical interventions, when were they discharged? All of those decisions get checked, or and maybe it's not appropriate. I don't know. I just have this kind of personal
Yeah, I think it's a good point.
suspicion.
So I mean, something I thought a lot about, especially because you don't want to discourage people from, you don't want to create an environment in which the say, if we, quote unquote, the poor performers are,
Hmm.
worried about being punished in some way, so they stop engaging with it. So the separation between the top performers and the poor performers just increases. That's definitely not what we want. So it's something we thought a lot about. The other, we work very closely with the universities in Germany, and Germany actually has some quite interesting sort of data protection laws. So one of the caveats was you couldn't pick up individual people and say, you
Okay,
know, um, Sharon is doing
Caroline.
is doing really badly at this. And so what the teachers get is a broad summary view of how their students are performing per disease. And so
Fascinating.
one of the things, so for example, I'm going to talk about cardiology because that's just recently what we just did. So like you might have a cardiology block, and it's very tempting when you're a teacher, or even you're a junior doctor. Junior doctors do a lot of the teaching of medical students. Like, okay, cardiology, the most important thing to think about is like myocardial infarction, which is like, you got blockage in your heart, you get a sort of heart attack. Um,
I
and
almost feel like just pausing there and just saying that myocardial infarction is because so the myocardium is part of the heart, which and infarction is is it Greek or Latin for stoppage? I'm not sure. Anyway,
oh, I don't know.
probably.
It's bad. You haven't got enough blood supply going to the
Yeah,
important
that's right.
parts of
Yeah,
your heart.
essentially, like life is getting very short for you.
And it's painful. And so that's, one of the big kind of ticket items in terms of cardiology. You always want to make sure that you are capturing that and you're not missing any. But it's also so typical that the medical students know it really well. They know chest pain. They know, that's the thing you need to look out for. And what they're less good at is dealing with, and I think genuinely they do receive less teaching on, is things like heart failure, which kills hundreds of people, thousands of people a year. Some of the arrhythmias, which are perhaps less common, but maybe do present in the emergency rooms in slightly atypical ways. And so, if
Oh, so
you're
there's another point that we should possibly raise for a generalist audience is that the this flatlining kind of cardiogram is not what happens in real life. If someone's heart is distressed, the rhythm that the cardiogram has will look very odd,
yeah,
and there are different patterns which require different interventions.
yeah, thank you. That's useful. I so I what teachers can do is that they can then look at, say, I've included 6 diseases in this class. And even though all of the students have played they played the role of the doctor and they've seen different patients with these different conditions because they're all unique patients, they can say, oh, broadly speaking, my students are not good at treating heart failure. And so I'm going to give some specific teaching about heart failure because that's an area that they don't know as well or they're not picking up as well. And so we often see when we look at these, maybe we have 6 diseases within a certain class, we often see that they're doing really well with myocardial infarction that we talked about, but they're doing very poorly with things like heart failure. Or alternatively, they get the diagnosis right of the, terrible chest pain that you're having, but they don't give any pain relief. That's a very common thing that we see. And that's very
Sure.
true to life. You do see that
Okay.
in, you get people in the emergency room who, they get the right diagnosis, but they don't then end up having any pain relief, which is the thing that they care about is, to get
Right.
this terrible pain. And
I
so
can
we are
sense that.
picking up those things. We are picking up those things, and the fact that it does reflect like what I've seen in real life and what other people have seen is reassuring. Um, so yeah. But back to the question, which was, are we picking out individual students? We're not. They can see their own performance, but teachers
Mhm.
can't see anything other than the sort of metric at a class level.
Ostensibly, this is a Rust discussion, but this
Yeah.
is fascinating to me. So I have one other thing about planning this. Do you ever have a very like I don't know what the I always I always get stuck on the pronunciation of this word. Is it pedagogy? Pedagogy? I'm
Oh
not
yeah.
sure.
Yeah. It's not we don't
Um
really use it as commonly in the UK to be honest, but people use it.
okay. Right. So if from like an instructional design point of view, if you were to just give a boring day in the simulation, like, is that something that's of like worth? Do you ever just kind of not have really tricky, odd kind of test cases in there, or is that kind of silly?
No, I think it's a really good idea. I think so we don't necessarily have boring patients in the sense they all
Mm,
do have something wrong with them.
right, right.
I have
You don't have
thought
someone coming in just essentially that actually paracetamol or what have you is fine. Go home.
we do have a couple of patients, like scenarios, or you're not patients, so diseases where essentially the treatment is like go home and rest and take ibuprofen.
Mhm.
But things like musculoskeletal pain, um, and we do have like a cold type
Sure.
thing.
Right, because
Um,
people turn up to the ED with a cold.
oh yeah, I mean, I when I was working in general practice, I used to get a cold literally every 2 weeks because I saw so many sick kids for for winter.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, it was yes, I don't miss that aspect of it. Um,
Mhm.
but yeah, we do have them. We don't do purposely boring shifts, but I
No,
will
no, no, it
say
was just
that
more out of curiosity. I don't
I
expect
think
that
it's a good
that
point, and we do have we I would say the vast majority of the diseases they do present in the sort of classic boring way, the chest pain patient, uh, it- and then there's sprinkled in there are a few more unusual presentations of the same condition, and
Sure.
so you have to make sure that you're still looking out for whatever it is that's presenting as something slightly unusual, which happens.
Do
Um,
patients ever get transferred to the doctor in a way that either misses or misrepresents, so is essentially the handover wrong? Um, and they
we
have to go
don't
through the process. Yeah.
We don't have that, but we are just going to have handover happening. From You can arrive in the emergency room via the ambulance or via
Mhm.
just walk in, and so there's in the new version, hopefully, which will be out in autumn time, there will be a capacity to have like a triage nurse give a handover and an ambulance crew give a handover. And I think I might add some variation into that. So sometimes they're just missing, maybe not from the ambulance crew, but certainly from, maybe the nurse hasn't got to them yet. And so there
Interesting.
is
Yeah,
no
sure.
sort of handover. So yeah, there's sort of
Right, so
very
you arrive before the handover does, and so the patient's waiting there to be and you
exactly,
okay. Yeah.
yeah.
Mhm.
And you've got to decide from sort of you've got to decide who you take first. So everyone starts in the waiting room. So you've got to make your decisions about who you take first. And that can also cause problems because you might be very tempted to take the older person who seems like, they're really sick because I don't know, they've got chest pain. It turns out they've just pulled a muscle and you've missed the 44-year-old who's
Mhm.
actually having a serious
A
medical
heart attack.
complaint. Yeah.
Yeah.
So
No, it's
there's sort of, you make decisions about, who you should take just like
I
in
am
real life.
laughing to my yeah, no, I was gonna say, well, do you have staff walkouts and a whole bunch of other kind of complaints? Like, what if someone forgets to put the tea on,
Oh,
and stuff?
yeah. I mean, the only sort of distraction we have at the moment is the bleep, which is the bane of my life when I was a junior
Sure.
doctor.
Yeah.
I mean, and I had such I think it's a Pavlovian response to it that any time I heard a beep noise
Beep, beep,
for
beep,
like
beep, beep,
2
beep, beep.
years. I used to look down at my right hip where my pager
Mm.
was or wasn't and look for the bleep, even though I was on the tube or somewhere it was just someone's phone. So yeah, that was a big distraction. But yeah, we have capacity to add in more distractions.
Yeah, I'm
Um,
sure there's like, it will be hard to try to make sure to kind of stop building new stuff because you could always add more complexity.
I
Um,
think that's been a
and
really key learning point for me is it's very tempting to add more and more features, but feature creep really is a really big problem. And so um it's really important to just make sure that you are just making sure that the things first are things which people actually want and that you have been paid to do or someone is willing to pay for. And yeah, so it's definitely a learning experience running a company and having to start thinking about these things. Um,
so how do you describe yourself to, let's say, a friend of a friend? You uh like how do you introduce yourself?
oh, that's a difficult question.
I know
um,
it's awful. Sorry,
I so I
it is a challenging one.
so I've adopted I've adopted the handle of like I'm just going to call myself a software engineer now, which feels kind of still slightly uncomfortable.
Mhm.
But I think,
Uncomfortable in which sense, if I may
I've been
ask?
writing software for like 3.5 years full time.
Okay.
And, because I wasn't, even before I went to the company full time, I was writing software and not working as a doctor. And so, yeah, that's what I've decided to go for. And that might annoy people, but that's what I'm going for.
Who would it annoy?
I think it's difficult.
Sure. So,
So
may I let's ask that again. So, if I could probe slightly, I'm curious as to, like, are you saying that you haven't earned your place to call yourself a software developer? Is that what you're saying?
I sometimes feel that,
Mhm.
because I haven't done sort of the equivalent of junior doctoring in software.
If it
And
helps, I don't know if this does. People fly me around the world to listen to me speak.
that sounds
I
like a
have
great
also
gig if I can get it, so
I well, look, if I can figure out a way to afford to bring you back to a country with very, if I can afford to bring you to New Zealand next August, I'll try.
sounds
The,
amazing.
but I also have not. So one of the things that software engineering, or even the term software engineering is difficult, right? That the software industry does not have centuries of practice. It doesn't know what it means to be in the profession. It isn't a profession. Is it a vocation? It's really hard to know. It's primarily filled with people who are most people describe themselves as quote self-taught. There are very few people that start at university and go through a tradition, let's say a conventional education or educational pathway. There's a lot of frustration that people need to bulldoze through. I think when you're learning to code, you're continuously fighting syntax and then semantics, and you're always slightly away from what you want. You've got this conceptual idea about what you want to construct or want to build, but you don't have the you don't have the intellectual ability to actually implement it, and that's extremely frustrating.
It
So if
is,
it's
and
it,
even when it works though, and you've implemented the thing, I often find myself thinking, is this the right way? Like, should I have used a different design pattern? So I'm a bit obsessive about reading like software engineering books, like trying to upskill in that area. I'm now going, ChatGPT is actually a great resource for, asking questions like, what is this thing?
no, no, I agree.
I
I
think amazing. Yeah.
actually I think it's very nice from the although I've kind of defected slightly to Claude, which is and the other one, although there are several other ones. But yeah, I think that these AI assistants are quite nice for being able to give you like a condensed Wikipedia page of a topic. And I ask it silly questions. And I think that one of the nice things about software. Oh, so actually, no, I don't want to. I want to try to figure out is if there's anything more that software can do better at allowing people who are changing careers to feel welcome. Um,
So I actually
is that
think that the software engineering community does this very well. Because, and the fact there's so many, all you need is a computer and an internet connection, and a bit of willpower, and you can probably teach yourself. And that's what we did. Like, we've all pretty much, well, not all of us, obviously, but most of us have self-taught, used books, used videos, whatever it is. Um, and so you can get into, I think you can get into this profession. And I wouldn't say I don't, I mean, there's obviously some parts of the community which are a bit unfriendly, but um, I think it's also, we also have to look within ourselves. No one said to me, "Oh, you're not a proper software engineer." I feel that sometimes, and I think if you speak to lots of people, that's what they often will say. Um, And especially junior people, they might say, "Oh, just write a few lines of code," or they'll have some way of couching it without using that label. So I
Mm.
decided 3 years ago I was just gonna start using it, and it felt really uncomfortable to start with, but now nobody sort of really questions it. But it is yeah, it's something to have a think about, but it's your own it can be your own insecurities, it's not necessarily a problem, I would say, with the community, because actually I think the community is way more accepting of you being self-taught than I can't think of another profession where they'd be like, they're not exactly gonna be like, I'm self-taught civil engineer." They'd be like, "You're not building a bridge, like, get out of here," like, or, "I'm a self-taught doctor." Like, there's not gonna be that. So I think that's a really positive aspect of it. You can change
Mhm.
career. It's so interesting how many people how they've got into software engineering. Um, yeah.
Yeah, I agree. I actually expected you to say something slightly different, but if I were to look at what you're building, I would describe you as an entrepreneur who is using software. Essentially, like, I'm surprised that your personal emphasis is on the code rather than the company, let's say. However, it's fascinating to me that that's kind of the mantle that you've chosen to wear.
Yeah, it's the one which feels most comfortable. I just can't ever
Nice.
imagine or describe I just cannot imagine ever describing myself as an entrepreneur. It seems I just cannot, like, but yeah, it's, I'm enjoying wearing the software engineer mantle for now, so or label.
Yeah, superb. No, it's absolutely I again, I don't know whether anyone will does one wear a mantle? I presume they
I
do.
don't know, that's why I changed it to label. I was like, "Do you wear a mantle?" I'm not sure actually, so, um,
But,
I'm sure we'll get comments correcting us, so
yeah, I'm looking forward to it. I heard you are involved with Women in Rust. What
yes.
is Women in Rust?
So, Women in Rust is a community group that I set up with another person called Lizzie Holmes, who is head of operations at Surreal DB, which is a database company that's built in Rust, multimodal database company. And so basically, we've set up this Women in Rust group. It's currently a meetup group, and we just started in, I think, April. We had our first meetup. And we've already got 190 members. And so that's been really positive. We've had some education lectures. The first two were me, and then I'm delighted to say we've got external people now coming in. These amazing female role models who can come and talk about how they're using Rust to build their business. And we've had people who Rust is their first programming language, and then people who are super experienced in other, and they've come from sort of different backgrounds. So yeah, if you are interested in Women Rust, you can join the meetup group, and there probably will be Slack or some other form of electronic communication coming soon. Once I figure that all out.
Is
And
it specific to London or at least the southeast of England
no,
or
no, so it's an online. So we always run
Oh, okay.
yeah, we always run online versions of the event. So actually we've only had one in-person meetup. Everything else has been online. And so we run this monthly lunch at what's it called? Learn at lunch. And that's, an hour over the lunch break every week. Not every week, every month.
Mhm.
And that's been really fun, really friendly community. And that's recorded and is put on YouTube and sort of various different places for people to watch later if they want to. And then we also have just started like a community kind of catch up as well. That's new for us, just to sort of try and encourage people to introduce themselves, talk about who they are, why they're interested in Rust. And we're going to
Oh,
be running
tremendous.
some workshops in September on APIs and hopefully some other stuff next year. So yeah, very grateful for Surreal Database Company or Surreal DB for sort of providing such a lot of support to us, and Lizzie's amazing. So you should definitely talk to Lizzie one day. She's a real advocate in the space.
I shall. Well, at least I'll go and nag her. I have a question. Are you doing a PhD?
I am doing a PhD, a very part-time PhD, but don't tell my supervisors. So I'm doing a PhD in, we haven't talked about this, but I've also had a bit of a career as an epidemiologist. I actually did it before I trained as a GP. Did epidemiology. And so I've been involved with it for sort of 10 plus years, or 10 years, I would say. And eventually I've taken the sort of bitten the bullet, I suppose is the phrase, and doing a PhD at the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine in medical statistics. And my PhD is on creating synthetic data for realistic synthetic data for electronic health record research, which is pretty niche, but really important.
No, I want to kind of scream because this is sort of slightly incredible. It's unfortunate that we're right at the end. I want to talk to you about record linkage, actually.
Okay, it's something I've thought a lot about and been very frustrated with in the past. And I think it's easiest in the UK, actually, of anywhere. I think we've got a very good setup for linking records. Maybe not the easiest, but it's sort of up there. And even then, it can be a frustrating experience. So
I bet. Well, I shall let you go and have a really, and please do have a pleasant day. How has summer been, by the way? Has it been heat waves and disgusting heat, or?
No, it's been distinctly not that. It's been a lot of rain. But it's, I mean, we've had a few days of sun, so it's been nice to have that. Unfortunately, I managed to get COVID during the time I was meant to go on my summer holiday, so I did not get to go to Portugal, but never mind. We have had a few sunny days since then, so yeah.
Okay, hey, well, it's been a very sincere pleasure, and thank you so much.
Thanks for having me.
Cheers. I shall push stop.